Shalom from Jerusalem. This is TV7's Israel at War update, and as we mark today, day 538 since the Islamist Hamas and its terror affiliates in the Gaza Strip launched their heinous onslaught on October 7th of 2023, the situation remains still in a quite hostile setting, particularly also in the Gaza Strip, Yemen, Syria, as well as the Islamic Republic of Iran. And on that and more, let's introduce our guests for today, namely the commander of the Israeli Air Force Task Force for Air and Missile Defense, Brigadier General in Reserve Doron Gavish. Next to him, retired Brigadier General Mark Kimmett, formerly an Assistant Secretary of State for Political and Military Affairs. And last but not least, Brigadier General in Reserve Dr. Amnon Sofrin, formerly the Chief of Intelligence at Mossad and a Senior Officer at the IDF Intelligence Directorate. It's great to see all three of you. And I'll start with you, General Gavish. Earlier today at approximately 1 o'clock p.m., the Houthis, the Iranian proxy Ansar Allah, launched 2 ballistic missiles in the direction of Israel. What can you tell us about that?
Well, indeed, Jonathan, this is what we've seen today. We have to say that this is what we are seeing in the last week, or even more than that. The Houthis continuously are being shooting missiles, ballistic missiles, toward Israel, some of them toward the U.S. forces, which are in the Gulf. This is what they've said, their reaction to the war in the Gaza, and also a reaction to what is happening with the U.S. forces with their own territories. We have to remember that the United States CENTCOM launched an attack toward the Houthis, which is going on for quite a while. We know that the nature of war against rockets and missiles is that although you are fighting against the enemy, sometimes there is a capability that could be, there is a launch that could be done towards Israel, United States, or other. We've seen it in Hezbollah, we've seen it in the Gaza Strip, so now we are seeing it also with the Houthis. But the history of this fight showed us that if you are decisive with them, and you have the patient, at the end of the day, they understand that they should cease their fire. We saw it in Hezbollah. We would probably, it's a matter of time that we would see it, I believe, with the Houthis, because one, that there is a decision by the United States. I trust the U.S. forces that the job would be done.
Thank you, General Gavish. General Kimmett, you formerly served also as the planner of U.S. Central Command during 2006, if I'm correct, during the course of which you had, of course, the various contingencies to plan in the event of such an offensive. We heard U.S. President Donald Trump yesterday talking about a lengthy campaign. What can you tell us about that, and what is the modus operandi, modus vivendi, within that context that CENTCOM is currently employing against this Iranian proxy in Yemen?
Yeah, I actually was at CENTCOM much longer than that, but I think the key element to talk about is when Pete Hegseth, the Minister of Defense, says we are out to reestablish deterrence. That goes to what General Gavish was referring to. Whether you call it a lightning campaign, whether you talk about it an accelerated campaign, it is clear that the Trump administration has shifted their targeting and shifted their priorities to not simply infrastructure targets or military targets, but they're now starting to attack leadership targets. The purpose is not, as many people in the press would suggest, the defeat of the Houthis. I think everybody realizes that that is probably impossible, or the destruction of their capabilities. The idea is to reestablish deterrence so that, as General Gavish says, they just simply realize the cost of firing is more expensive than the cost of not firing. That's what you are trying to do, reestablish that deterrence, as Israel has done so well with Iran. So the U.S. has upped its game, expanded its target set, expanded the quantity of missions that they're sending, and hopefully the Houthis will understand that the U.S. will continue this operation until both Israel is not being attacked and two, international shipping can be restored in full.
If I may follow up on that, since the question whether or not it's possible or not possible to defeat the Houthis is a lengthy deliberation that we're not going to enter into right now, but is it not safe to say that we need to weaken them to the point where they would have to confront their domestic enemies? And there are plenty of tribes that are quite eager to confront the Houthis and to push them back to the northern strip of territory that they used to hold up until merely 7 to 8 years ago.
Yeah, I think you have a point there, Jonathan, but I'd remind you that this is a group that was a declared terrorist organization under the last Trump administration. But President Biden took it off of the terrorist list for the simple reason that he believed that by doing so, we could reestablish delivery of humanitarian assistance to the country. They have done nothing of that sort. There are 4 more people starving in Yemen than there are inside of Gaza, yet the Houthis are continuing to say we are firing on Israel in order to allow the humanitarian assistance to get through into Gaza. The point I'm trying to make is if the million people that are starving inside of Yemen are unwilling to take up arms and actions against the Houthis, it's unlikely that simple military operations against them would weaken them to the point where other groups would try to take them out. So the best tactical and strategic view at this point believes that if you can't defeat them, at least reestablish deterrence and turn it off. And then hopefully continue to go after the Iranian supply chains so that even if they want to fire in the future, they don't have the ammunition or the capability to do so.
Thank you, General Kimmett. General Sofrin, I'd like to hear your take on this, since naturally the complexities that have to do with the Houthis are relatively old, and therefore there's plenty of lessons learned from the various years on end, from the days where they were actually helping the United States in confronting Al-Qaeda, all to the point where the Iranians took over and started granting them the funds and the munitions in order to convince Sunni tribes, despite being a Shiite tribe, to join and ally themselves with them. One of the key aspects of those alliances also has to do with the fact that they took hostages from the various tribal leaders, which allows them a certain relationship that is, of course, contingent on very significant threats. Of if one of those tribes does not listen, it may cost the lives of their kin within the Houthi circles. And therefore, is there something to be done on the human aspect where special operations or other aspects could potentially help decouple the various tribes that attach themselves to the Houthis proper?
When you look at the Houthis in Yemen, you have actually to look at it from 2 points of view. The first one is what happens inside the Yemen. Inside Yemen, the Houthis are not favored by anyone, and nevertheless, they are controlling the whole western part of Yemen, including the area of Bab el-Mandeb, and of course, this is a strategic place. And there are rumors that are aligned with the pirates in Somali, and from both sides of the entrance to the Red Sea, they control the area totally, and they can attack any vessel that is going there. That's one thing. The second one is what happens inside Yemen, the rivalry between the Houthis and the other tribes, especially those who are supporting what they call the legitimate and of course the known government of Yemen that is based on the eastern side of the country. and there is an ongoing clashes between them, and they still can't take them off, and still they can't push them back to the place they were. And if you remember, the Arab countries led by Saudi Arabia tried to attack them often and for a long time, and they didn't succeed even then to push them back. That means that in order to do so, you have to invest a lot of efforts and boots on the ground. Without boots on the ground, only by air attacks, you can't demolish them and you can't force them to go back or to stop fighting. And I believe that when you speak, Mark spoke about deterrence or restoring the deterrence. I believe that ideology of them is stronger than the deterrence of the Western countries, especially led by the United States. We have an example of what happens in Gaza. We believe that Hamas was totally beaten and so on. And you see the ideology brought them back to stand on the foot and to be equipped and to fight back and to build their capacity one more time. And that ideology. That means in order to unroot the ideology, you have to do something which is very extreme, and I don't see it coming.
I'll agree with most of what you said. I do think that all is good and well when it comes to ideology, but the makeup again of the tribes within this so-called Ansar Allah, which is dominated by the Houthi tribe, is not that same ideology, and therefore there are different components that can be shifted around in order to change. And I remember quite vividly when Secretary of State, the former Mike Pompeo, went and designated Ansar Allah, which was merely a couple of weeks before leaving office, to be fair. But nonetheless, one of the key elements that was apparent on the ground in Yemen was that the Emirati-backed militia, the Tawil brigades, were making gains, were making significant gains against the Houthis, particularly conquering also Shaiba and other locations there. And I went down my notes, and much of those successes were then pretty much revoked the moment there was a disagreement between the Saudis to the Emiratis, which caused all of this basically to crumble and to bring it to a stop. But nonetheless, before we turn to General Kimmett, I'd like to ask General Gavish on freedom of maritime navigation, since the Houthis have been launching various types of munitions towards commercial vessels primarily, but also to naval vessels of Western powers. And in that context, is there not something to be done technology-wise, as you are one of the top experts globally when it comes to air and missile defense?
Well, Jonathan, first of all, I want to tell you that, listening to your comments, it's always interesting, and maybe we should sometimes switch positions, because I think that there's a lot of knowledge that you are holding. Going back to your question, one of the I would say one of the most challenging issues is really how do you fight against enemies like that. And we understand, and we saw it, by the way, on the 7th of October, that unfortunately, if you want to go to a real full-scale war, technology is not enough. You have to really apply all your capabilities from the air, from the naval ones, and also on ground, because when you attack only from the air, or when you use only technology, it means I must say it's not enough. Without really getting into the details themselves, technologies could be used for self-defense. Some I would say events like what we are seeing. But it is much more complicated, because now you have those capabilities to put them on civilian vessels, and this is basically, it's not realistic at all. So I would say that technology, it's not enough, and we have to apply all the means in order to deal with that threat.
General Kimmett, as Assistant Secretary of State for Political and Military Affairs in 2009, you established Task Force 151 that contended with piracy in the high seas and the Gulf of Aden by the Somali pirates. What can you tell us about the effectiveness of this operation or this task force when contending with the pirates on the one hand? And of course, the United States has deployed a number of strategic bombers, B-2s and other bombers also in the vicinity, with a direct capacity to launch multiple attacks, not only against Yemen, but also against their backers, namely the Islamic Republic of Iran. What can you tell us about that as well?
Yeah, I really think those are apples and oranges. There really are not a lot of lessons learned from the Somalian piracy and how to take out the Houthis. The fact is that once we got an ability to prosecute the pirates after they were captured, that was really the way to fix all of this. It's easy to pick up the pirates, but nobody wanted to pick them up because they didn't want to own them. But let's go back to the Houthis, and I would agree with both of my colleagues. When I say reestablishing deterrence, look, I'm not the smartest guy in the world. I always went for what we call the gentleman's C, which means that you had some other aspect. You were either a great athlete, so on and so forth. So we're going to give you a C plus, which is the lowest grade to advance. I say that because we've got to understand that the term reestablishing deterrence is a gentleman's C. We'd like to destroy them. We'd like to defeat them. We'd like to have them surrender. We'd like to have them completely extinguished as a terrorist outfit. But unless we are willing, as was said, to put boots on the ground, that's never going to happen. And right now, the political dynamic is such that Americans don't want to send their sons and daughters onto the ground inside of Yemen to end this threat. So we're trying to get the lowest passing grade, which is the gentleman's C, which is we define success as reestablishing deterrence, which is simply another way of saying a gentleman's C is defined as having them shoot no more. That's the lowest level of passing grade that we can get. And candidly, with all the other imperatives and all the other challenges, I think that's the best we can ask for at this point.
And on the B-2s?
B-2 separate issue that has absolutely nothing to do with our good friends, the Houthis. Obviously, the B-2s and the other elements of capability that we continue to bring in and out of the region, to include another carrier task force, obviously are not too worried about. They can be used in assistance on the primary counter-Houthi mission that is being conducted by other forces while they're waiting. But I think we can all clearly understand that now that the Iranians are putting their missiles on Thum Island, the Americans are now starting to increase their pressure, offering negotiations to the Iranians, getting rejected by the Iranians. I think this is just simply the next step in the maximum pressure campaign, and also a pre-positioning in case that maximum pressure campaign fails.
Indeed. Well, during the Strategic Command hearing at the subcommittee of the Senate Armed Services Committee, the general of the U.S. Air Force Strategic Command, General Cutton, came out and stated that the Iranians have now merely 1 week before they can assemble a nuclear weapon or breakout, for that matter, which is a lot closer than the 10 to 15 days that were officially recognized prior. On that point, General Sofrin, to what degree is Israel considering or not considering, but preparing itself alongside the B-2s and other assets in the region to confront this Iranian threat?
I believe that Israel and the United States are now very much coordinated, and they have the same aim to stop Iran from developing nuclear capabilities. I mean, for military use, namely a bomb. And that means that the coordination is based on mainly two topics. The first one is to apply the maximum pressure, which is the attitude of this current administration of the United States to apply the maximum pressure. That means that to force Iran to go back to negotiating table and to get to some agreement, a new agreement that will postpone the capabilities or cancel it or delete it for very many years ahead. On the other hand, if the Iranians insist that they want to negotiate, and that's a message they sent, that they were not negotiating under what we call sanctions and military or other pressure applied on us. And that means that if they will not apply to the pressure that is applied by the United States or by the American administration, the other option is on the table, and this is a signal. The B1 and the B2 that were deployed right now very close to this area and can get immediately to Iran if needed is a great symbol. And bear in mind that we had a demonstration of B1 flying in the air, accompanied by F-35 of the Israeli Air Force. And this is another message. It means that we are coordinating and we are willing to use the force if you are not going to apply on other means. That means the big stick is on the table and we are ready to use it. And if you are not going to give up, namely to get to negotiating table and begin reaching to some agreement, we are going to use force. And beware, because we mean it seriously this time.
General Gavish, naturally, your task force is preparing for this matter as well. What can you tell us about that?
Well, Jonathan, this is something that, of course, we could say in general that Israel said for quite a long time that we won't allow Iran to get into nuclear capabilities, weapons of mass destruction. The Israeli Air Force and the IDF, together with our counterparts, are trained for this mission for years. So it is really a decision of the cabinet from the Israeli side, of course, the White House and the Trump administration. At the end of the day, how things would move forward. From the military point of view, military job is to prepare itself and to be able to do whatever is necessary and needed when the decision would be made. So this is right also for today. What we could say is that both militaries are much more experienced because unfortunately we had to use all our capabilities, including strikes in Iran. So from this point of view, we could say that the IDF is much more experienced in projecting its power within the region and also experienced in defending against those ballistic missiles, UAVs, and cruise missiles that came from Iran already in 2 events, but they're coming also from other directions. So prepared, much more experienced, and decision would be made by the political level.
Indeed. General Kimmett, we don't have very much time left, but nonetheless, of course, B-2 bombers are the only stealth bombers alongside the B-21s, which are not yet operational. But when we're looking at a target like Iran, naturally, you stated also in the previous edition that you joined in our Jerusalem studio panel that if this happens, it needs to make certain that it finishes the job, since the Iranians are going to respond and they're going to lash out in every direction, knowing that what may occur, of course, is the end of their regime. What is your take on that in a 2-minute brief?
Well, I'm going to be very quick. I think we continue to make the mistake of thinking that somehow we are going to jump from a rejection of negotiations straight into warheads on foreheads inside of Tehran. I think it's important for your readers your listeners to understand that President Trump is genetically opposed to starting wars. He puts it as a badge of honor that he's never started a war. So it's important to understand that there is a middle set of objectives that need to be achieved or not achieved before the United States joins anyone in a coalition of attack against Iran, and that's the maximum pressure campaign. The maximum pressure campaign is, in my mind, has sort of been a moderate pressure campaign up to this point. There's still a lot other than just sanctioning the local barber to change the behavior of Iran to get to the negotiating table. We haven't taken out their capability to go through the Persian Gulf. They need dollars. Most of those dollars come from China, from the oil that they sell in India. And a blockade of the Persian Gulf, the Arabian Gulf, would create that condition where they're already tough economy, hard-hit economy would even be hit harder. The negotiations with the Russians, the same thing. So I believe before we start sending B-2s and B-1s, which are currently forward simply as a demonstration, because everybody knows they can fly from the United States, I think that's a lot of saber rattling. But if your viewers want to know a prediction, I would say we're going to be doing the maximum pressure campaign for a long period of time before we start dropping bombs inside of Iran.
That being said, if you do establish a blockade, you do grant them also the initiative in the event that they decide to react, which is also a calculation. Another point that I will make, time to target with forward deployments of B2s and B1s naturally grant you the capacity to do a lot more sorties in a shorter period of time from point of deployment to the point of target. And the third point I will mention is that naturally, the power disparity is here significant, so the Iranians need to very carefully calculate what are their next steps in this whole equation. But with this being said, I'd like to immediately thank General Kimmett, General Gavish, and General Sofrin for all of your insights. And I'd like to thank all of you at home as well. Until our next edition, from here in Jerusalem, Shalom. For more of TV7's productions and editorials, we invite you to visit our website at www.tv7israelnews.com.